2018 UV2017 amended petition. 3419 through 3425 East 10th Street and 970 North Olney Street, Center Township, Council District 12, Zone C3. 10th Street Baptist Church, incorporated by David A. Rutherford, requesting a variance of use of the Consolidated Zoning and Subdivision Ordinance to legally establish single-family dwelling at 970 North Olney Street and to provide for 6 dwelling units on 3419 through 3425 East 10th Street, not permitted, consisting of 1 single-family detached dwelling at 3419 East 10th Street, a garage at 3423 East 10th Street, and a multifamily structure at 3425 East 10th Street. All persons speaking on this today, please step forward to be sworn in. Do you solemnly swear or affirm under the penalty for perjury to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do. Oh, Lord.
I have no idea how many persons will say yes. They would say I did not swear.
You can't see them either. Good afternoon. I thought you guys were saving the best for last, but you moved us back up here. So, my name is David Rutherford. My offices are at 8801 Southeastern Avenue on the far east side of Indianapolis. I'm here on behalf of the petitioner, 10th Street Baptist Church, and the representative of 10th Street Baptist Church is sitting to my left, is Reverend Greg Dixon. This case, when I took this case, I actually thought this was pretty easy. I thought we had a ministry that was doing some good in a neighborhood, that was improving some vacant buildings, and I never in my wildest dreams could imagine where we've ended up here today. But clearly we have a mess. Let me try to, as best I can, explain what we're asking for, because it's really pretty straightforward if we go through them parcel by parcel. The case started because my client put a sign out to replace a sign on a piece of property that he'd recently purchased that was for a counseling business, thinking that he could just replace the placard so that people could contact him if they wanted a room in the housing ministry. And that sign was reported, and so they came out and inspected him, and then we had a fire code inspection that followed that for that building, which was legit, and it had been converted from commercial to residential, so we had the fire department involved, and we ended up moving some people around in the project to get them out of that building because that was a promise that was kept with the fire department.
Mr. Rutherford, did you provide one of your exhibits to the monitoring?
I believe they've got them, but I'll be happy to give it up.
Provide one to staff.
I did. My apologies. But in the end, we did a little bit of research, and because we were trying to keep the city happy with the violation stuff, we filed something pretty quickly without a ton of research being done, because this property has quite a history. Originally, there were 4 parcels involved. One of them included the original church that turned out was already operating legally with a variance right on the corner of 10th and Olney, so we eventually took that back out. We did not need the variance to apply to that piece of property. And so we have 3 parcels that are remaining. And I've tried with the site plan I've given you to show what we have left. And the underlying problem here is that we have, when zoning was done in the middle 60s, the city kind of went along 10th Street with a wide brush and just zoned a bunch of stuff as the commercial. And a lot of it was never commercial, and they know that. So we're in a situation where we're having to fix something that happened 40 years ago on a couple of these pieces. But the easiest one is the 970 North Olney parcel, which is the property that on the site plan faces Olney. It's over here on the side behind the primary church building. And then the second exhibit I give you is sort of a really poor copy of something I got off of the city GIS mapping imagery that again shows the 970 Olney parcel. That was only acquired by my client about 3 or 4 months ago. He did that because of, again, the people that were displaced from the 3419 building. He didn't want to kick them out on the street. So this property was for sale, so he purchased it and moved some of them into there. But without question, that home was built as a residence. It has always been used as a residence. And we believe that had we just been dealing with that house alone, we would have done a lensu and been able to solve this and never had to come in front of you. So to me, that's the easiest one. And in our negotiations with staff, not only have we agreed to limit the number of occupants to that home to 4, which is actually less than has ever probably been in there based on what we understand from the neighborhood there, but we have also agreed that if the rest of this variance that is tied to the operation of the ministry ever goes away, that the 970 Olney piece would still be legally established as a residence because it is on its own lot, always been used as a residence, and we're just curing what we believe just to be a zoning error at the time this was done 50 years ago. The next piece of property is really complicated. It's one of the most bizarre buildings I've ever seen. It was all built as one unit, and if you look at the second page of this exhibit, the 34, 25, and 27 are 4 units that are 2 on the first floor and 2 on the second floor in a building that is commercial in the structure, but the top story was developed as 2 apartment units from the very beginning, from everything we've talked to the guy who built it. And it has rear entrances to those apartments. They're separately addressed. The downstairs, that has the windows on them, the storefronts, that was used commercial until about 3 years ago. And it was used for the Dower Lock Shop. And when they sold that property to my client, that was vacant. My client tried to lease it for commercial, has been unsuccessful in finding anyone to move in there. It's still vacant. However, one of those apartments was used for temporary housing, again, to keep some of these guys off the street. And that's another story to be told later in the hearing, possibly. But the back portion of this property is attached to the 4 apartments units. They share a common wall, but if you were to look at it, it's obviously a residence. Vinyl siding, windows with shutters on the windows, residential roof peak. It was always used as a house. It was built as a house. It was lived in by the Dower family. And again, we think if we went through a lensu process, we could establish that ought to be separately done with the lensu without having to go through a variance, but we're here. So while we're here, we're trying to just get that established. And again, in negotiations with staff, we have capped the residence in that house. It's a 3-bedroom house at 3, which is less than the Dowers had when they lived there, and certainly what less the capacity would be if somebody else was using it. So those 2 are the 2 simplest to explain. Is the house that's on the back of that, they call it their multifamily building, but really it's kind of a multi-use structure. It's got the 4 units on the front and the house on the back. Now, as to the 3423 parcel, that is a garage. It's a 3, it doesn't look like it from the street. It's got a residential front on it, quite frankly, but in a door that looks like it's a house. But if you go in behind it, it's a 3-bay, very nice garage, and that will stay as is. It's just been used as the Dower's personal residence, and it's zoned commercial. So we are here to allow that to continue to be used as a residential garage, even though it's zoned C4. And that's all we're asking. We're not going to change that to living space. Nobody's going to ever live in there. And we've committed in the plan of operation that will never change. Okay, so those parcels, to me, are the simplest part of the case. What we're trying to do that has gotten a little complicated here is we want to convert the bottom 2 units in that 4-unit commercial building. We want to convert the bottom 2 units to apartments because they're vacant. And there is a housing ministry that is going on in this corner building that's not part of the variance case that is servicing inner city men that have jobs. This is not a homeless ministry that's supported by public money or anything. It's a privately funded ministry. But we are supporting men, and there's a need for that. This is a really rough neighborhood, to be nice, and there's murders there. There's lots of stuff on the news about this thing. There's people sleep on the streets in the summers. We didn't bring these people here, but they're there, and they need to be ministered to. So that's what's been going on, and there's a call for that. And so we'd like to use those bottom 2 units for apartments to match the 2 that are upstairs, and 1-bedroom apartments, and put a cap of 2 residents, again, in each one of those. And that requires a variance because clearly that has been used on the bottom for commercial purposes. And we're not changing the zoning, and we've even negotiated with staff the preservation of the facades, the front facades of that, so we wouldn't take away the right that when there's commercial it returns to that area, that there'll still be an opportunity to use those. The bathrooms are already in those units. It's not going to be that hard to do. And the staff has reserved administrator's approval for anything we do related to that, so that we're covered to make sure we preserve the commercial potential for that when that does return. And then the 3419 building is the last building, which is the westernmost building, and it was built as a counseling business, counseling service, and operated for several years in that area, but it has been vacant for 5 years. It's been for sale for 5 years. And my client purchased that about a year ago and had converted it for some apartments within there, and that one, what we'd like to do is just convert it to a single-family residence as a temporary use again with a limit of 4 residents per the plan of operation as a part of this housing ministry. And all of that, we've agreed to preserve the facade. We've agreed to create a seating area for the guys to sit outside to get them off the front porch, even though it's a nice front porch, so that people don't want to see that from the front. So we've agreed to do that. And anything that's done to the exterior or the interior of that building is also subject to admin approval. Now, everything I've just explained to you has staff's recommendation of approval. And I would bet you that if I was standing in front of you representing anything other than a housing ministry that has been put on trial in this case, that we wouldn't have a room full of people here. But somehow this case got turned into a referendum on how is the right or the wrong way to minister to men that are in this situation in this city. And it frankly got out of hand. There was my personal opinion, some very unprofessional and some disrespectful things that happened in these NESCO meetings. We were warned that they were powerful and they'll bring lots of people down here to support them. And they're right. They got a whole room full of people here that's down here. But we cut off communications with them because in my 30 years of experience as a very experienced zoning attorney in this city, I believe it's fair that we ask these neighborhood groups to be respectful and to not accuse people of being liars and to not commit trespass and to not window peep and take pictures through people's windows to try to catch us in lies and basically threaten, when my client objected to that, to go out in the alley and solve it out there. I think that's over the top. And it's really not my history with NESCO. I've had some other cases with them. There were some really good people in the room during that second meeting. We'd made a lot of progress. We dropped the original number from even taking this building out that was in the original deal. We dropped it from 32 to 19 as a cap. My client spent $15,000 redoing the outside of all these buildings, turned it into one of the nicer buildings along that entire area of 10th Street to show his commitment to the neighborhood because, again, he'd been accused of being a slumlord and a crook. So he spent the money to fix that stuff up to prove he was committed to the neighborhood. We added some people to his ministry staff because there were some concerns expressed after the inspection that we did have. They asked to see him. We showed them around, showed them whatever they wanted to see. We had nothing to hide. There were some suggestions. We added some people to his ministry board because there were some concerns about how that was structured. We clarified that my client does not take any public money, that he does not take a salary, that he goes 40 to 40 weekends a year. He's speaking in churches throughout the United States raising money for this ministry. It's a larger ministry, not just this particular housing ministry. He's got 3 feeding stations in Indianapolis that feed people 3 times a week, including one in this building that's right next to this housing ministry that feeds these men. They plant churches all over the world. They have 2 other churches in the inner city that they own, that they help subsidize other churches to be able to meet in older buildings that have been remodeled. They have an urban youth ministry. My client was a preacher at a very large Baptist church on the south side. He recently retired from that, and this is his passion. And so he goes and takes love offerings at these churches all over the United States and raises private funds for this ministry. And it's a different way than some of the ministries that are in the NESCO area operate. We get that. But nobody in that area is ministering to these men. And it's a different philosophy. These guys are held accountable. They have to have a job. They're only charged $300 a month plus utility. I mean, that includes utilities. So nobody's getting rich here. We're never at full capacity. But it's what they can pay, and they have pride that they can pay something. And they are being held accountable. This city county council is going through a process right now where they're trying to figure out a better way to spend public money rather than just basically pretending this population doesn't exist and paying millions of dollars a year to get them off our streets. These guys have accountability. There's full-time supervision. That plan of operation I've given you shows you the rules, or it's in the staff report, shows you the rules under which we operate. There's no drugs, there's no alcohol, there's full-time supervision on place. This is clean, it's dry, it's safe. We don't have police runs, we don't have fire runs. There's no history of problems here. The only reason we are here is because of that silly sign that had somebody start looking. And the neighbors around this property have very much appreciated what we're doing. They very much appreciated the cleanup of this property, the money that's been spent. But we have tried, honestly, to try to respond to the things that the NESCO group brought up and the Rivoli Park group brought up that we could solve, and we weren't able to get there, and it got ugly. So we started with staff, and we worked through and did everything that staff asked us to do. And that entire plan of operation was a result of negotiations with the staff planner that's here. And I think she did a really good job. They brought up some really good points, and we pinned all this stuff down and solved problems. Everything that we're doing goes away if the ministry stops operating it. The variance goes away. It goes back to the buildings that are there. So we're not doing anything that's permanent other than the 970 Olney house would stay a house because it's always been a house. So again, we're not trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. We're happy to talk about anything that's going on here. I'm really sorry and sad that I'm having to tell the story about what happened in this meeting. There's some good people that were there at that meeting that don't deserve to be part of what happened at that meeting, and I'm not trying to overstate it. I'm just saying I've been doing this for 30 years. I've had 4 or 5 experiences like that in my years. Every time we pull what we call the unreasonable neighbor defense. If people disrespect you and they won't talk fair and they won't be reasonable. I'm used to being the pig at the pig roast. My client is not. So he didn't really enjoy that at all. It was just time to stop. But we're happy to answer any questions that you have, and we think this makes things make sense, and that quite frankly it would make sense, and we wouldn't even have a room full of people here if we had not got sideways with them in the discussions about this ministry. And there is a religious land use act that protects ministries from this kind of scenario, and we have explained that to them, and it just made them mad. So I just remind you that we do have that protects ministries from land use regulation, and we're here anyway. We're here to try to comply, to get the variances that we need to be legal and go forward in good faith, and that's why we came down here. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
I have one question. What's the use at 3429 at Olney and 10th Street? It says it's excluded, but I was just curious. Do you know what the use is in that building?
Yeah, that's the church.
Oh, that's the church. Okay.
It actually
but
doesn't.
It has
look,
nothing to do with this. Okay.
It actually doesn't look like it from the street. I'll grant you that. I was as amazed as anybody when I went in there. But there's a full sanctuary. That's actually also where the feeding ministry is.
Okay.
So half that is a big kitchen where they have the feeding ministry 3 times a week. And there are some units upstairs that have been there for a long, long time, and that's part of that housing ministry. That's where it got started, quite frankly, and then it's expanded into some of these other homes.
Okay. And the issue with the sign setback?
It's gone because we withdrew the development standards variance with that. So we don't need to
acknowledge that. Okay, I didn't. Did you ask that earlier?
I did. I come up here.
That's what it was. Okay.
I was the one that stood here while the staff was doing their thing because I didn't realize that they were going to go that fast. So sorry.
Thank you. Any other questions?
One more. Okay, what's the maximum number of residents?
19.
19. And how many are there now? You said it's not.
Well, there's what? In those basically we're talking 3, if it's all approved, 3 single-family homes and 4 apartments is what's there. And what would you say is there now? Is it close to that? There's 11 or 12 right now.
Okay, thank you.
Questions? Thank you. Yes. I don't need to ask this, but is there anyone in the audience that has any interest in 2018 UV 2017, 3419, 3425 East 10th Street, and 970 North Olney Street? Those who are speaking, please come forward.
Thank you.
Should be sworn in. Hold on for a second, please. You ready, Heather?
David Hiddle with the Near East Side Community Organization, or NESCO Land Use Committee. My address is 322 North Arsenal Avenue. I am representing NESCO Land Use, and also here tonight are representatives from Rivoli Park neighborhood, which is the neighborhood in which this property sits, and Brookside neighborhood, which is the neighborhood immediately across the street. Mr. Rutherford did note that we had a couple meetings, and one of them was contentious. I think in my 15 years on this committee, it's the most contentious I've experienced. I don't think that what happened in that meeting is necessarily germane, but if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them because they were different than he intoned. We're not objecting to about half this request. The variance for 970 North Olney, which is a house, it was built to be a house, it's always been a house, it should stay a house. So we're not objecting to that continuance to be able to continue to use that property as a house. And we are also not objecting to the portion involving 3423 which looks like a house, but at some point was converted to be just a garage. So on the outside, it has the appearance of a house, but it was gutted and now is simply, I think, probably a two-car garage. So we are not opposed to those two portions of the request. And we do appreciate that staff pushed back against the initial iteration of this and had it tapered, at least to a certain extent, particularly the removal of the corner lot. But as a group of neighbors, we're not supportive. We do recommend denial of the remainder of the request. And though Mr. Rutherford's petition is extremely complicated, you have pages and pages of findings and qualifications and notes and ideas to read through. Our remonstrance is not, we just want you to deny this. For lots of reasons. It doesn't meet the comprehensive plan. The current comprehensive plan is the Highland Brookside Plan, adopted in 1993, and it recommends office and retail commercial for this portion of 10th Street. The plan that will soon replace that plan, which is the county's and city county's new land use map, is going to be recommending village mixed use for this particular area. And on primary arterials in particular, that village mixed use recommendation typically translates to very neighborhood-friendly commercial, retail, and office uses. And it is zoned C3. So it obviously, as a variance, does not meet the zoning. It does not meet the current plan. It does not meet the future plan. The findings are not met. Mr. Rutherford's findings, number 4 for the variance of use, state that the 2 storefront units on the ground floor of the 3425 East 10th and the 3419 building would not be permitted to be used for residential purposes without the variance. In other words, he's saying, we need the variance because we need the variance. We need the variance because the zoning doesn't allow that, and that's not a hardship. What's also not a hardship is when you go ahead and do work on a property, do structural work that requires permits without permits. When you go ahead and use a property in a way that is not allowed by the zoning without pursuing the right zoning. When you do these acts where you essentially I don't want to say take the law into your own hands, but do what you want to do on a property without due regard for building code and for zoning, and decide at that point, I guess, that you seek for forgiveness rather than permission. I think that exacerbates the fact that there is no hardship here. And there's a violation history. We have 2 of the 3, I think actually 3 of the 4 properties have received violations in the last year for use as an automobile repair shop illegally, residential use illegally, and conversion from commercial to residential use illegally. So all of these steps were taken by this owner without doing the simplest due diligence for zoning and for building code. The basic thing is we don't want this ministry to expand. This is a poor neighborhood. We don't need to see it change. We want to see it remain inclusive and be able to provide housing for lots of different people. It's not going to be gentrified. Nobody wants that. We have no concern with this use. Sleeping rooms. There's a illegal sleeping room facility down the street from me. It operates well. I visited and spoke to the proprietor. They have vacancies. It's legal. They provide the same kinds of services that are provided here, but in very reasonable, safe, healthy, dignified living conditions. It's not the case in this instance. We have lots of churches, we have lots of ministries, and they do heroic work in this neighborhood and in the Near East Side in general. We have the Bonner Center, which is the flagship of all of the community centers in the city. It provides wonderful services to people that need them. We have missions. We have shelters for women suffering from domestic violence, 2 of them, one of them expanding soon, 10 stories tall. We have transitional housing. We have single-room occupancy right down the street in Irvington on Washington in great abundance. And we have really cheap rent in this neighborhood. The thing, I think, more than anything I've said, that we want you to take into account is the horrible living conditions here. We don't mind the fact that folks who really need cheap housing would live in our neighborhoods. They do. That's great. We don't want them to live under these conditions. We can't in good conscience support any effort to expand this ministry. And I use the word in quotes. And I don't do that easily or lightly. We can't in good conscience support any expansion of this. We acknowledge that the building on the corner has been able to be brought out of this petition, and there was a variance long ago that legally establishes the use within it, so it's not on the table here. We wish it were, but it's not. Even then, with this expansion, we cannot support it, and we hope that you will not either. We have had 4 people from the neighborhood and neighborhood organizations and institutions tour the facility, and I think their testimony is really what's most important and powerful, and so I will leave that to them. James Taylor from the Bonner Center, I believe, will speak first.
Did I swear you in?
Yes, you did. I stood up.
Okay, well, I don't have an attendance slip for you, and I announced that twice, so before you leave today, I need you to fill one of those out.
Okay, be happy to. Again, my name is James Taylor. I'm the CEO of the John Bonner Neighborhood Center. Our organization serves thousands...
Address, please.
Pardon me?
Your address.
2236 East 10th Street. Our organization serves thousands of homeless or near homeless individuals on an annual basis, with a particular focus on homeless prevention, wraparound services, and finding and even providing housing to those in need. Currently, our center has over 218 units of housing, about half of which is designed for vulnerable individuals and families. As an Erie Side organization that serves our low-income and vulnerable neighbors, I am particularly sensitive to the challenges they face when it comes to the lack of housing options in our community. Earlier this year, I was one of a group of neighbors that was given a tour of this particular site that currently houses many of the residents that live at this site. What I learned from our tour and conversation with Reverend Dixon and Mr. Rutherford convinced me that this situation is the exact opposite of how we should aspire to serve this population. From our tour of the site, I found appalling and unsafe conditions. Beyond basic negligence and disrepair of the inside of the building, the first floor of the building absolutely had no smoke detectors installed. On the second floor, where there were living units, I did not see one operable smoke detector. Of the 2 stairwells that had access to the second floor, one was completely blocked off with boards and chairs, which would have prevented residents from having a second escape route in case of a fire. The floors and walls were dirty. I saw ductwork that was exposed. I saw wiring hanging from the ceiling. When Reverend Dixon was asked if he would find these conditions acceptable for members of his own families, he simply responded that they were not trying to provide residents with the Taj Mahal. Reverend Dixon also indicated instead of reinvesting rents back into this property, he was using resources to support his mission efforts in Africa and Asia. With all of the above in mind, I'm opposed to any zoning request and would encourage the city to conduct further health and safety inspections to determine the habitability of the building. Thank you.
My name is Joe Bowling. I live at 57 North Dearborn Street, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46201. I serve as Executive Director of Englewood Community Development Corporation. Ours is a faith-based nonprofit birthed out of Englewood Christian Church that's been right there in the neighborhood for 120-some years. Among other things, we develop and manage affordable rental housing for vulnerable populations and those coming directly out of homelessness, some of the same neighbors that are served by this housing operation. As James mentioned, I won't reiterate. I would just concur with a lot of what he said. I think the test for many of us that do affordable housing for vulnerable populations, is it safe, is it decent, is it affordable? And what we saw when we toured this property, you guys, was not safe, was not decent. And frankly, given the amount of people that can live in these units, it might be affordable for them, but it's kind of a moneymaker for the overall operation. And again, it's objectionable. I had a neighbor of mine who's a homeless neighbor living on the railroad tracks that knocked on my door at 11 o'clock last night and borrowed a few things from me so he could kind of go back out in the cold. I'd prefer he not be there, but he wants to be there for right now. So I think we all care about these populations. I think we all care about new solutions to better serve people. But this isn't one. And from what we saw, from what we've heard, from what we've learned, from what we know, I would not encourage an expansion of this operation because I don't think it serves neighbors well. I don't think it's safe. I don't think it's decent. And I'm not particularly sure that's affordable either. And again, this is from a guy that's in ministry, that cares about some of these things based upon the standard, love your neighbor as you love yourself. And I wouldn't allow my family members to live in the units that we saw, and I don't think the petitioner would allow his family members to live in the kind of conditions that we saw, and it's certainly not going to be something that we're going to advocate that should be expanded in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your time. My name is Tim Harmon. I own a business on 10th Street, a few blocks away from this ministry. I've also been a part of this community since 1972 when I moved there from the Broad Ripple area of Indianapolis.
Mr. Harmon, I don't think you stated your address.
My residential address is 18 East 40th Street, Indianapolis. Through my business, I had the opportunity to make a delivery to the 970 house, and I was invited into the house to carry in some furniture. When you first enter the house, there's a small foyer that has a few chairs and maybe a small love seat and a television. That's used as a group place. The living room and dining room have both been framed off and are separate rooms that are rented out as bedrooms. We went through the kitchen to get access to the dining room, which was where my customer was sleeping. There was a man in his underwear making lunch or dinner or something. The kitchen was pretty bad, pretty dirty, pretty bad. My client had some mental conditions, and he actually had such a full room that he was not able to fit in the items that he had bought from my store, and so I took them home. I agree with what James and Joe have both said about this facility. It's really sad, and if you visited family members in this house, I guarantee all of you would cry. It's not a good ministry. It's not helping these people. Remember, and you're all very smart people, remember that the attorney representing this ministry is a hired gun. He's paid to say what is going to convince you to vote. And I've been there, and it's not a good thing. Thank you for your time.
Joe Smoker, 2807 East 10th Street with Near East Area Renewal. I'll try to be quick here. Just to circle back with what David was speaking, in terms of a variance of use, you have to prove that, excuse me, that there is reasons to support that use, and simply saying that you need a variance because you propose residential isn't a reason for a variance. The only reason I've heard from the petitioner is that commercial uses just simply aren't viable. Yet in the wealth of information you have, there's nothing supporting any kind of commercial market study. From our perspective, it's very much a growing and dynamic section of the city. We all do significant work. We've lived there. We own businesses. That's why we are here today. So I think that what you have before you is a request to continue doing something that wasn't necessarily permitted in the first place, but not something that is supported by the community or that is warranted by the ordinance.
Good afternoon, Board. My name is Chris Staub. I'm a resident and occupier of 936 North Oakland Avenue, Indianapolis, Indiana, in the Rivoli Park neighborhood. I am the Vice President of the Rivoli Park Neighborhood Organization. I am also a member of the NESCO Near East Side Community Organization Board of Directors at Large, which serves the 20 neighborhoods in the Near East Side. I also chair a Crime Reduction Code Enforcement Committee for the Near East Side. I am the one that started all of this as far as the initial complaint to the Business Neighborhood Services Inspector regarding the conditions What first had tipped us off was the sleeping room sign on the 3419 property. This raised a red flag within our community, and we invited a business neighborhood services inspector to come out and take a look at the property, at which time we found not only the illegal sign, but junk, trash, and debris, and inoperable vehicles, which indicated an auto repair service at the 3419 property. We also found developmental standards of the parking lot having no striping or handicap parking, as well as the sleeping rooms, non-permitted use. The sleeping rooms not permitted in a C3 in a neighborhood. This has been a particular strip of property within the community that we have identified problematic as the conditions of the exterior of the property, and I have had very many civil discussions with petitioner Greg Dixon, and he has complied to the fact that he has brought the exterior of these properties up to at least a presentable situation. We had to actually point these out to him to make him aware that this was items that the community actually did not agree with, and that we have to hold our houses up to the same standard. He should hold his up to the same standard. He eventually did bring them up to a reasonable standard. One of the things that we have noticed within the Near East Side is the situation where people are actually taking and carving up duplexes and making them into what we can consider short-term rentals, where there is actually no vetted interest in their tenants. What ends up happening is this causes a great stress upon the community for numerous vehicles that now are parking at one particular residence, to the point where we're getting calls for service from IMPD, IFD, EMS as well. The 3419 property, IMPD gave me a notice that there was 17 calls to that one particular address. Most of those turned out to be the fact that a neighborhood had recognized somebody that had been a sexual offender registry client that had not registered to be at that particular address. So that ended up 17 calls just to one address is a definite increase in social services that are brought to these properties. We do not in the city have a short-term rental ordinance. There is no way to license these properties. There is no way to inspect these properties. There is no way to hold these to higher standards within the community. And at this point, the community has taken the position that we are totally against this variance. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Who's the... Yes, please. Thank you. Smart. Staff?
Thank you, Chairperson Young, members of the board. I would like to, I guess we'll start off with the history of the site. So 3419, 3423, and 3425, in staff's research, those have always operated as commercial units, thus requiring the variance to use them residentially. 970 has been a house. Somewhere along the line it's been zoned commercially, so that staff is recommending approval of legally establishing that dwelling. Additionally, while excluded, staff would like to point out that in our research, 3429 may be a church. They might be offering supporting uses to these residences, but it is not the 10th Street Baptist Church. So that's what prevents this petition from being used, or from being a special exception.
You say that one more time. It's not a what?
3429 is not the 10th Street Baptist Church.
Okay.
So that is what prevents this petition from going forward as a special exception. So we're just considering the use variance now to use these 4 included building or parcels as residential parcels. Staff does recommend approval with some commitments that the variance grant be subject to the plan of operation, which limits it to the petitioner. That the single-family dwelling at 3419 East 10th, or proposed single-family dwelling, shall be improved with landscaping, and that is subject to administrator's approval. And the number of residents in each one-bedroom apartment shall be 2, and the maximum number of residents in each single-family dwelling shall be 4. Those are regulations imposed on dwellings by Health and Hospital and the zoning ordinance, so we're just kind of reiterating it in the commitments. I will point out that if the petitioner is renting out homes, they will have to become a registered landlord. And an LNCU would not be granted for 3419, 3423, and 3425.
A what? I'm sorry.
An LNCU. I know the petitioner stated that they would file for an LNCU for those structures along
What? You can elaborate. What's the
legal
acronym?
non-conforming use certificate.
Okay.
I apologize.
Heather, you best.
And that would not be possible because in research those have always been recorded as commercial. Like I said, however, staff is still recommending approval of the use variance. We do believe that in the short term, these structures are not viable as commercial uses. Therefore, bringing in new development by granting the use of these structures to be used residentially might help bring some more economic stability to the area. So with that, I can answer any questions.
You didn't indicate that there were any restrictions on 3425, the multifamily. Are there any use restrictions on that one, as far as the number of tenants or anything?
Yes, the restrictions are based on unit. 3425, the front of the structure will be 4 apartments. The rear of the structure is 1 single-family home. You can kind of see in your site plan, you can look at one in the staff report or the one the petitioner gave you. It looks like that structure is kind of cut in half. Mm-hmm. The northern portion is a block. The southern portion looks like it has a patio. So it's split. That block is 4 apartments. The southern portion is a single-family dwelling.
Okay, and then the portion on 10th Street, they're converting the bottom to residential, correct?
The bottom of 3425?
Yes.
Yes, they're converting the entire structure to residential.
Oh, I thought you said it was residential on top already.
No.
Okay.
We have documentation that has always been commercial.
On the first floor,
We have documentation that it was the whole
building?
the whole building.
Okay. Any more questions for staff? I need my timekeeper. Ready? Oh, yeah, take it that time. Petitioner?
Let's start with the staff report first. I want to clarify something. The staff is correct that there were no permits pulled for the apartments upstairs in the block structure, the 2-over-2 structure that's along the front. Apparently, Mr. Dower did not pull permits to...
Which address are you talking about?
I'm sorry, the 3425 building. However, those apartments were without question built as a part of the original design. There was not any permit, so there's no permit history because it was all done before we have permits. So there's separate entrances to those apartments. There's stairways that go up from the back. Their address is 3427 and 3427 and a half. Mr. Dower would tell you that he's had tenants in those apartments the entire time that he owned it, but he apparently didn't pull permits. So from staff's perspective, there's no permit history to prove that those were properly occupied as homes. I think that's what she's telling you. And also, the health code says that the maximum number of residents is tied to unrelated parties. And we started out with that, and staff wanted us to actually limit it to residents. So we agreed to language that says for residents, period. So if we switch to a family, we get a husband and wife and 2 kids, that's all that can be in that home. But right now we minister to men, so there would be a maximum in those homes of 4 men in the 3419, 4 men in Olney, 3 men in the back of the 3425 area, and then 2 men each in each of the apartments. That's the max that would be in there. And one of the reasons we did that is we have a pair of brothers that actually rent one of the apartments right now, and they share. It's a pretty good sized apartment. They share what is a 1-bedroom apartment between the 2 of them. So that's why we needed to keep it at 2. You file a variance of use in this kind of situation just because you really don't want to change the zoning. This is a depressed area. I agree there's hope. Down the road, my client hopes this all works out, that this all gets, there's some opportunities for him to flip this commercial zone corner. There's some opportunity there. But in the meantime, we've got 2 vacant structures. We've got a population that we didn't bring there that needs to be served. And the findings of fact that have to do with what they've cited that I've not proven, it's based on the vacancy. We've had that commercial space downstairs in those storefronts for 3 years, and we can't get anybody to rent it. It's still vacant. The house, the 3419 parcel, was on the market to sell as a commercial property for 5 years vacant. So we're trying to come up with a temporary use. It goes away when my client quits owning the property. These variances go back. Somebody new's got to come down here and convince you what their plan of it is. This is a classic case for how you take distressed property that's not able to be used and you use it for productive use that generates property tax, because my client also is not requesting a religious property tax exemption on these properties. You need to know that, because he just doesn't think he wants to do that. So it's a classic way that we do this in areas without killing the underlying zoning, because there is value to that, not only to my client but also to the city and to this neighborhood, and we don't want to change that. This is a temporary use. The inspection that was done, unfortunately, at the time, the church building, the original church building, was included in this case, and that's what everyone went in. Without question, it is the worst space. It's upstairs. It's I don't agree that there's not fire protection in there, because we have a fire code consultant that my client is working with that's going through there and has a plan. We just stopped actually implementing it until we got the variance done. But without question, if it's a concern, there's a violation over our heads. So we will not be given occupancy permits on these other places until the fire system can be proven to be up to snuff. But we think it already is. But if there's any concerns, that's covered. The health department, we have nothing to hide. If they want to come in and look around, they're welcome to go in there. I've looked. There are 3 bathrooms upstairs in that building. They all function. They're all clean. They're recently remodeled. There's doors replaced. Yes, the carpet is a few years old. Again, we're not. The Taj Mahal was the wrong way to say this, but these people can't afford a brand new house. They can't afford something that maybe my family would want to rent. And that's kind of the point Greg was trying to make when we talked about that. And these publicly funded ministries, they're doing a lot of good out there. I'll give them credit for it. They're very well run, but they are very heavily funded. And they can create standards. They have the luxury of saying, yes, we're going to fix up a home and spend $50,000, $60,000 on it and turn it over to them and see if that will change them, and they'll enjoy that for a while. And I've served on an inner city homeless board. I've seen what happens. People change because they want to change, not because you give them a new house. Or some people can be rehabilitated in that way. Some people can't. And these particular guys, they choose these rooms. Nobody's holding a gun to their head. This is available. It's safe. It's dry. It's clean. It includes utilities. There's supervision. There's somebody around that makes sure they don't have fights with anybody else in there. There's no women allowed. No drugs. No alcohol. It's supervised. This is the kind of stuff that my client really believes is a need. And when there stops being a need, we'll stop doing it. But these people have not been in these other properties in that inspection. And the other thing is, we're not done. Because this all kind of blew up, the plan is to finish this stuff out. We know the health department can come in there at any time. That's fine. If they want to come in, if there's things wrong, he'll fix them up. But these are $300 a month with utilities in poorly insulated homes. I mean, there's nobody making money here. He's not taking a salary. Yes, if there's a profit at the end of the year and it goes into the larger kitty and helps pay for the food, the feeding stations, or maybe they can plant a few churches overseas from some of that, it's all put in the same kitty. All the preaching he does, all the love offerings, all that goes in the same kitty. Again, the key thing here is this is privately funded. He is accountable not only to his God, but also to all the people who donate money to this ministry. They're around. They see what he's doing. I mean, That's who he's supposed to be accountable to, and the health department, and the fire code, and anybody else that wants to come look. They're welcome to come look. We have nothing to hide. My job is not to stand up here and lie to you. My job is to try to set the facts out in front of you. We think what we're doing is an excellent short-term use. Staff agrees. This is not commercially viable ground. It's not going to be here long. It'll only be there until there's a better opportunity to come along. And this is a productive use of property that is currently not being used well for people that look him up and want to live there because this is their choice. And if they don't like it, they can free to leave at any time. Nobody's signing leases or anything like that. It's they stay there as long as they want to stay. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. How much time do we have? 5 minutes? Demonstrators, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you again, David Hiddle, with the NESCO Land Use Committee. I'll ask Joe Bowling first to come up and speak to the assertion that residential use here is, I guess, a good idea because it's the only thing that's viable at the moment. And Joe probably has worked as much as anybody to court commercial and non-residential development into the Near East Side and probably can speak as an expert on that fact.
I became a commercial industrial real estate appraiser in 1998 and have had that certification since then. Part of my responsibilities for Inglewood CDC is to find reuses, new users, and uses for properties throughout the Near East Side, and we've had good success for that, both on East Washington Street and now beginning to see some of that on East 10th Street. I would question whether or not that these commercial bays where Dower's Lock Shop operated at 3425 are not commercially viable. I believe that they are. I believe that with a reasonable marketing period and exposure time and kind of professional kind of broker services, that these are viable commercial spaces that don't necessarily need to be converted to residential to be viable. We've seen that now on East 10th Street and on East Washington Street. And I believe that could be the case for this property if there was a real effort given to marketing these spaces. But again, just in broad terms, if you've got 30-year-old carpets inside the building, if you've failed to even put plaster or drywall on the interior walls in the common areas, if the one kitchen that serves the 8 or so men that are sleeping in the upstairs of the 3419 building doesn't even have a kitchen floor or much of any appliances, I just don't know how you can make a case to say, give us the opportunity for a big expansion if you can't just provide those basic services, recognizing that at the end of the year you did end with a surplus. And so if you've got a surplus at the end of the year, reinvest in the properties, change the carpets, put drywall on the walls, have a decent kitchen for 8 people to share. I think that's basic common sense to say, do well with what you've got before you ask to do more.
And I guess if we haven't made it clear enough, we do want to make it as clear as possible that we do not object to the men living in this structure being in our neighborhood. We object to the men having to live in this structure. And if it weren't for the initial complaint called in, then nothing would have been known about how the place is actually operating, and who's to say that anything would have changed at this point. Mr. Rutherford did note that he has 2 other options. I think he said that he could invoke or pursue a legal nonconforming use and be able to do what he's wanting to do. And I think Paige talked to that. But he also briefly mentioned, I think probably in reference to our LUPA, which is law that allows religious institutions, religious uses to supersede land use decisions by boards of zoning appeals and plan commissions and be able to build churches and inhabit spaces as religious institutions, regardless of what BZAs have to say. So if that's actually a path available, then let him take that, but don't grant him the opportunity to allow this particular ministry to become larger than it is. We do implore you, please, to deny the components we've talked about, and would be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Any questions? None? Seeing no questions, I will.
Could I possibly correct an error? Just in 30 seconds.
The remonstrator's time isn't done yet.
Okay, I didn't know if they were done yet.
Go ahead, Mr. Deep. Oh, I thought their time was up. Is their time not up, Heather? No, not yet. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I will be short. Obviously, the community has a passion, or we would not have a representative from the John A. Bonner Center, Englewood Community Development Corporation, several neighbors from the Rivoli Park neighborhood, members from Brookside neighborhood, and members from the Emerson Heights neighborhood, if we did not feel passionate about this opposition. Thank you.
Thanks.
Apologies, I didn't introduce myself sooner. My name, of course.
You can have 30 seconds, ma'am. What do you want to say?
Thank you.
Did I swear you in?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm Natalie Waite, 510 North DeQuincy, Emerson Heights area. All I really had to say was I have begun an association, Near East Side Association of Tenants. We do not support these particular uses. We do support people having a place to stay, but as a group, the Association of Tenants, we're still very small. But we want them to have the wonderful, clean place, a decent place to be, and that's what we would support. So if, and I don't know if you guys have zoning in terms of D5 or higher, maybe it would make more sense for some of these than single family. I wonder about that because single family isn't what's going on here, obviously. It's sleeping rooms. So I ask you to decide appropriately.
Thank you.
Ma'am, I will need you to fill out an attendance slip along with Mr. Taylor, whose attendance slip I've still not received.
Thank you.
Good.
So I've heard multiple times that you're not against residents being able to stay, but you're more so against the conditions in which they would be staying. Is it the remonstrator's opinions that there's no, do you have confidence that the petitioner could get that space up to your satisfaction for residents to stay there?
No. No. The cosmetic changes that were made because they were caught, and they were relatively minimal. But no, we don't have confidence that that would happen.
You said you wanted to correct. Okay, you got 30 seconds. Go ahead.
First of all, there was testimony a few minutes ago that I think was an error by one of the remonstrators, and I apologize. You addressed, you said 3419 was the building you went in that didn't have a kitchen?
It had a kitchen, but no kitchen feeding.
Mr. Bowling, if you're going to speak, then Mr. Rutherford probably shouldn't be directing.
Okay. I thought I heard testimony that there was a problem with the 3419 building. And if they went upstairs in 3429, there is a full-blown kitchen downstairs that's used for the feeding ministry. That's the cooking space that works for those men. They did not go in 3419.
Okay.
And the other thing is my client spent $15,000 in the last 60 days on that property, including a new HVAC system in Olney, and he put a $40,000 ceiling in another church. He has the money to fix this up.
I got you. Thank you. Well, this is interesting. Just a quick statement. This is, my personal, I guess, preference as chair is to say that I do, sympathize. And I've heard of, I think, everybody over there before in my regular life. I think the struggle with the board here is that we're dealing with much more simple issues than what you guys are dealing with. And we're dealing with from my standpoint, should structures that have been used pretty much as homes be allowed to be used as homes. And the other issues regarding the health department, BNS permits, to me, those are separate issues. I have no reason not to believe anything you're saying, but I haven't seen a report from the health department. I haven't seen any of these things. It's all just verbal communication. And so I have to cast my ballot based on those type of facts. And do I think that allowing these buildings to be used pretty much for what they've been used for, but under some guidance and under a much more watchful eye, is that reasonable? And so that's how I will cast my decision. I do encourage you guys to try to work together. I know you seem like you're trying to do the right thing. I know you guys do the right thing all the time. You guys know where resources are to, even if it's to assist him in what he's doing. And I'm not predicting, I'm just talking for myself. I don't know if this is going to pass or not. But I'm just saying that if it does, he's in the community, obviously, so I think it's always good to try to mend ways and see how you can help each other. I know there's a wealth of knowledge over there in that group about rehab, all the type of funds that are out there and everything else. And so I'll just say that. Are there any other comments from the board? Mr. Steinmetz?
I would just like, before you take your vote, to clarify that your vote will or will not be subject to the commitments requested by staff in the staff report.
Our vote will be subject to the commitments requested by staff.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I have one comment. We hear variance requests when someone says we can't rent it, we've really tried hard, we can't find tenants. And I question, when no money has been put into the property, why you would expect for anyone to want to rent it. And it doesn't sound like until the last, 60, 90 days that there's been an attempt to improve these properties to make them more attractive. This area also is coming up, and new businesses are forming there that for the first time in probably 25, 30 years, it's going in that direction. So if you couldn't rent it 5 years ago and you hadn't improved it at all, this doesn't surprise me. However, when I'm finished, yes. However, when you haven't put any money into your property, and basically from what they describe, you haven't been until you were under some duress to do so, I'm not convinced.
I appreciate you giving me a chance. My client has put tens of thousands of dollars into that property since he's purchased it. It was a mess. Truly, the 3429 building was a mess. And he's continuing to do that. It is privately funded, so he has to come out of the ministry to do that. But this is just part of the plan. It was always part of the plan to do even the stuff on the outside that's been done. It wasn't because we got caught. We got accused of being unfunded. So between the time that we had the first meeting with NESCO and the time we went back to them, my client said, I got the money to do this. Let's just do it. Let's prove to them that we have the money to do it. So he did that. And as to the 3419 building, it's been vacant for 5 years. We've only owned it less than a year. It was for sale, commercial, rent, whatever. My client had nothing to do with that property until very recently. And so it's not our fault that it wasn't rented for commercial. He bought it after someone else had failed to find a commercial.
I'm going to have to give them time if you keep going. Is there any other comments from the board? If not, please cast your ballots.
Nobody, will you please acknowledge that he has withdrawn the development standards portion of this request?
Again, I acknowledge that they have withdrawn the signed portion. I gotta go get my kids pretty soon.
UV 2017, 5 votes cast. There's a lot of flourish in your signature. Can you please circle your vote for me, please? That's the kind of stuff that's crazy later. Thank you, sir. 2018 UV2017, 5 votes cast. Duke voted yes. Kelly, no. Young, yes. Reuter, no. Banning, no. 2 yes votes, 3 no votes. This petition is denied and will be continued for the adoption of findings of fact in support of the board's decision.